Alright folks, hello. It is time for another rant on a Tuesday, no less. Hope you're having a wonderful day. If you like what I do, the subscribe button is down below. Please click that button if you want to help the channel grow or anything like that. I'm on a very squeaky chair today. I don't know what's going wrong with my office chair, but maybe I'll get some WD-40 on that later. But if you're getting any models over the next few days, then make sure you head on down to Composite Games in the description down below. Use the promo code Northern Exile to get yourself 5% off your model order at checkout. They do everything down there, from Lord of the Rings to Warhammer 40k to whatever you want. It's all down there. Go and have a look. All stuff good for you if you want to support the channel whilst you're getting your models. So, this rant is entitled Games Workshop Keep Abandoning Storylines. I've just finished reading a lot of Fabius Bile's books, and I love Fabius Bile. He's one of those characters that has really started to grow on me in the hobby, just as Belisarius Cawl has. As much as Cawl is a bit of a red herring in terms of the lore, and he's a lightning rod for a lot of opinions that people have on why the lore isn't working these days, you know, through actions that he's taken to bring about the Primaris Marines and folks like that. I'm actually really enjoying Cawl as a character. He's actually quite likable, and I find him very, very, very funny. He's my kind of guy, right? I like listening to the way he speaks and the way he goes on about things. He's very, very funny. His plans are bonkers, but there we are. If I was alive for that long, I'd probably be bonkers too. So, the point is, though, I've had this sinking feeling when I've been reading these books. And have you ever had that sinking sensation when reading some 40k fiction? It really is a specific feeling. You read something in a story or a book that is absolutely shattering with its potential. Its implications on the wider setting of 40k are seemingly limitless when you read about it. You're very excited to have discovered something that your friends haven't discovered yet whilst reading it. But then you remember, Games Workshop will never pull the trigger on this new plot thread that you've discovered. Whether it's the Terminus Decree, Clone Fulgrim, Corrupted Corax and Lehman Russ, the entire Yenid Eldar faction, or whatever other massive storyline Games Workshop have introduced and then dumped like a hot potato, all of you will know this feeling. You've all been there when you've been reading a book or reading a codex thinking, wow, this is really earth-shattering. This is going to change the entire way 40k is. And then you realise, oh no, of course it won't. This will be the last time it's mentioned, right? And then the next time it's mentioned, it'll be exactly the same as this time. As a Grey Knight fan who's been reading about this bloody Terminus Decree for upwards of 15-20 years, I am sick of Games Workshop throwing these things into their codexes and then just leaving them there for decades. They create something totally fantastic and really cool, something that could change the trajectory of 40k itself, and then they walk away, never to speak about it again. In fact, Games Workshop seem to go out of their way to not mention anything more about said plot lines, ever. So, why do they do this? What could be the symptoms leading to this near constant edging of the audience who are clamouring for something other than Chaos versus Ultramarines? Why do Games Workshop seemingly ignore really cool ideas in favour of really far out ones like the method of Lionel Johnson's return? Well, let's have a look under the hood, shall we? I think the first issue here is like too many cooks spoiling the broth. You know that saying, right? If you have ever been a writer in a collaborative sense, in a collaborative process or shared universe, most of the time your team is spending a lot of its work reining in writers who want their storyline and characters to be the storyline and characters. I honestly think writers placing things like the Terminus Decree in the Grey Knight Codex, Clone Fulgrim in Fabius Bile's stories, and other things like that are generally failing in the aspect of not rocking this collaborative boat too much. In essence, I think some of this does come down to writer ego and Games Workshop not being able to tell their writers to just stay in their lane sometimes. Back in the day, I'm going to use Dan Abnett as a positive example, and I very rarely do that, but back in the day, when Dan Abnett wrote the books that would make him the 40k writer, for better or worse, as the End and the Death trilogy proves and shows. In the Eisenhorn trilogy, he was very careful to keep Eisenhorn away from the major players. That was genius. That's a very clever thing that he did. We do see Chaos Space Marines a handful of times in his books, and Space Marines are even more rare in the story of this grizzled old Inquisitor and his extensive and sometimes weird casebook. The big characters of 40k, your Abaddons, your Emperors, your Calgars, and others, like them, never seem to appear in Eisenhorn's books that resemble the very peak of Dan Abnett's 40k career and skill. Which is ironic, as these are some of the first books he produced for Games Workshop. Dan Abnett was not trying to ape off of others to make his characters important. We see a lot of this in other writers, and especially in fanfiction writers, so bear this in mind. They tend to place their own characters in the room with big setting characters, just to get a rub of glow of greatness from them, do you know what I mean? More skilled writers do this by allowing their stories to introduce earth-shattering ramifications for the setting and leaving that thread dangling. But it's still the same thing. Abnett, by and large, with Eisenhorn, doesn't do this. He is focused on making Eisenhorn himself a big cheese that joins the pantheon of awesome 40k characters, rather than fluffing up Eisenhorn with cameos from important people. Caiaphas Cain does this too. Cal Jericho does this. There are a lot of characters in 40k who are quite famous, Gaunt's Ghosts, who are quite famous, who do not rub up against the important people of the setting, right? And they become important on their own because the writer has taken ego out of his writing and just wants to write a good yarn about a character he made up in 40k. Take a sip of tea here. I think this is the spirit of many 40k writers, if I'm being honest. They wish to leave these massive dangling threads that can be used at any time in the hope that Games Workshop will one day use them. They do not realise that Games Workshop do not really care about the integrity of the story or lore of 40k. They care about selling models. All of these grand designs, postulated by authors in the hope of changing the setting itself, will remain unused and dangling forever. A constant itch on the backs and brains of 40k fans that will never be scratched. There is nothing more frustrating to an audience member than seeing a writer not take their own work seriously. When plot threads are just forgotten about, contradicted, or thrown aside with a hand wave, it seems like the writers have a complete lack of respect for your time and attention. This is not a good feeling to have, and it is one that is prevailing 40k by and large, right? In a strange way, being a 40k fan, well, a lore fan in general, is an exercise in frustration. It is likely the most detailed, vast, and expansive setting in science fiction, but even then, the stasis of the setting is in means it will never be anything more than a backdrop for a game, rather than a living, breathing setting itself, right? Now, I understand that's just the status quo, right? And that's just how it is. And I do realise that there are some parts of the frustration of 40k that go beyond this. The very fact that we have unreliable narrators in 40k, and the very fact that time itself is actually very pliable in 40k. You know, we're now seeing events in the 42nd millennium that don't have years attached to them for the first time ever. They're just in the 42nd millennium at some point. Games Workshop do this because Gilliman, in lore, gives up trying to date things. Right? He actually gives up trying to date things because he finds out that there are that many flaws with the Imperial dating system that it might actually be the year 30,000, not 40,000, which is incredible when you think about it. When you actually think about it, it's kind of incredible. Or it could literally be, you know, the year 39,000, and now we're going into the 40th millennium. We don't know. Sorry, no, 39. You know what I mean? You know what I mean, right? It's just incredible the way that dating works in 40k. We have a lot of unreliable narrators, so the frustration is already there. But that's a built-in frustration, and I can forgive that. What I can't forgive is not treating your own setting with any kind of respect because you want to sell some more plastic crack, right? You may be screaming at your monitor or phone right now that the setting has moved forwards, and that I'm wrong. Well, not really, but let me explain. Yes, certain storylines have moved forwards, but the setting itself has not. For the setting to move forwards, seismic events need to happen, such as, like, I don't know, the Emperor returning, a complete new age dawning with that return, and the endgame of the universe that never seemingly ends, kicking into gear. I'm not saying we need an end times, right? I'm saying we need to establish a status quo that's going to run and run and run forever, essentially, so we can have 40k forever, right? That's the kind of event that things like the Terminus Decree, Clone Fulgrim, and others are pointing towards. Events that will never happen. But let's examine what has happened, what has moved on, shall we? Space Marines and Chaos. That's it. Yes, we have small bits of lore for the other factions like Tyranids, Necrons, and others, but they are all focused on how they are affecting the Imperium rather than what is actually going on and changing within them. What I mean by that is, we may get lore on the Tyranids, but it'll be a throwaway chapter in the Devastation of Baal, for instance. Do you know what I mean? Or it'll be always framed through the lens of them attacking the Imperium. We never hear from them in their own words. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like, you know, history is written by the winners, you know? Well, the winners in 40k is the Imperium, not because they're going to win in lore, but because they win because most people collect them, right? It's kind of like the Romans and the Carthaginians. I know, segue. I know I'm going there, but it was what I did my degree on. Please leave me to it. So, we don't know next to anything about the Carthaginians. Why? Because they were wiped out by the Romans, literally. Almost to a man, woman, and child. Alright? City devastated, wiped off the map, that's the end of the Carthaginians. Third Punic War happens, gone. Right? That's it. They did such a good job at eradicating and amalgamating the Carthaginians into their own Latin Roman culture that we don't even know what language they spoke. We know it was called Punic, but we don't know what it sounded like. A little while ago, one of my professors at Durham, he uncovered something that he thought was amazing. It was a play by a Roman writer from back in the day. And it was actually a rewrite of a play that had already come out, right? And there's a Carthaginian character in that play who's speaking some sort of language that we don't know. And he got very excited because he thought, oh my god, it's ancient Punic. We found the Rosetta Stone of ancient Punic. We now know what the Carthaginians spoke, right? It turns out this was basically a carry-on film, but Roman. And all the Carthaginian character was doing was talking in gobbledygook. Just going, "Gawky, booky, booky," doing stuff like that. Right? It was a practical joke played on us by the Romans 1,000 years later, 2,000 years later, over. Right? That's the kind of thing we're dealing with 40k. That's the kind of misinformation we're dealing with. I can only imagine that as somebody who likes ancient Carthage like me, that's the closest I'm ever going to get to being a 40k Xenos fan. I know, bit of a segue, but hopefully you understand what I mean by that. That's the closest I'm ever going to get, because it's so frustrating. I never get to read about the guys that I like in their own words. It's always through the Romans. Just like Eldar players and Xenos players in general very rarely get books of their own. They very rarely get books like the Farsight books or any of the Eldar books from back in the day, right? Because they're not really explored anymore. Only Space Marines and Chaos are explored in depth. Everything else, you've got your codex, and even then, it's surface level. Very surface level, because it has to be, right? It's a rule book at the end of the day. And that's it. Again, as I just said, yes, we have small bits of lore for other factions like Tyranids, Necrons, and others, but they are all focused on how they are affecting the Imperium rather than what is actually going on and changing with them. Games Workshop seem to want to have a dynamic setting that will move on, right? Introduce new events and people of massive proportions, but at the same time, they do not want to leave the current setting behind for fear of alienating a vast portion of their current audience. Because you know what would happen if they move things along, right? You would have a plethora of people rending their garments much worse than we had at the start of 8th edition. Much worse. Can you imagine that the boiling piss that would happen if they actually moved on the setting and started, you know, fulfilling their promises of telling us what the Terminus Decree does, telling us what happens with Clone Fulgrim. Does he escape? What happens there? Let's see it. Let's see what happens to the galaxy as these dudes get out there and start doing shit. These pieces of breadcrumbs are only valuable if they actually fucking lead to something. At the end of the day, you need to stop edging your audience and give them a happy ending, right? I'll get into that a bit later, but I run this past my missus before. Is this too much of a euphemism? She's like, no, it works. Okay, fine. So I put it in. In this, I do feel for them as a writer myself. I really do. Instead, they have tried to find a middle ground where the Space Marines, especially those main characters of the setting known as the Ultramarines, and Chaos have moved forward in time and pushed the setting onwards. This is cool in itself, and I remember the time of 8th edition when the Great Rift was going on. It was incredibly fascinating and exciting for the new customers of my store and the older hobbyists coming and going. It seemed like we were finally getting movement, and even if you are a bitter greybeard, you know who you are, who hates the implementation of the Primaris Marines, even you have to admit, it was really fucking exciting there for a while. Why? Because we thought, hey, maybe the entire thing's gonna move on. Maybe the Primaris Marines implementation is a bit naff. Alright, well we can swallow that, because we're gonna get more Eldar lore, we're gonna get more Orc lore, we're gonna get more Necron stuff. This is gonna be awesome. The thing is, we were sold a lie. A lie that this would continue for every faction in the setting. Instead, we were teased Yenid for a long time, or Iniad, whatever you want to call it. I call it Yenid because it's a nice name. We were shown the intricacies of that faction in particular and how it could be galaxy altering. Then instead of following that down to its natural conclusion and seeing where it led, we were essentially shown it being put on ice, smashed apart by the Death Watch, and then never mentioned again. Great. I know a lot of Eldar players, and yes, their faction in-game is well looked after, I know, but in terms of lore, it's a fucking shit show, and let's be honest. We have the Terminus Decree that could actually shut the Golden Throne off. I shit you not. That's rumoured that that's what it's for. It shuts off the Golden Throne of the Emperor. And yet the Grey Knights just sit on it, even at the very height of the Great Rift and Abaddon bearing down on Terra. And about that, what the fuck is Abaddon even doing? His story is that he wants Terra like a northern metalhead girl wants dick. Yet he goes on a little sojourn with Vashtor, yet another character, because we need one of those, don't we? To get the Arks of Omen on the flimsiest of pretexts. It's like he literally has nothing better to do. And let's be honest, he doesn't. Because they can't write him properly. Abaddon fucking sucks, and it's not Abaddon's fault. Games Workshop has spent the last 30 years telling us he sucks through his actions in the lore, because he loses constantly. Only now, they are dictating to us from on their hill, wagging their finger at us that he is a cool, and he's a mastermind of evil. Too little, too late, lads. They place their main characters on treadmills for decades, incessantly and all the time. I'm not saying we need to actively see them doing stuff all day long, every day, but we should have an idea of where Abaddon is and what he's doing to get to Terra. Right now, he's just a fucking plot device around which other things spin. His story is abandoned, like everything else I'm talking about here that is abandoned, because the Imperium aren't quite ready to receive him and entertain him just yet. Things happening in 40k, things happen in 40k because the plot needs them to, not because the plot naturally led them to happening, right? Can you imagine Tolkien taking Frodo and Sam and having them camp in Mirkwood for several years and never going anywhere and going everywhere around Middle Earth but Mordor? Can you imagine? Imagine they go on a circle around Mordor, getting into hijinks and never actually going in. Tom Bombadil aside, I mean, you can't, can you? Because that'd be fucking retarded. Games Workshop does this with every major character and plot point from Gilliman to Abaddon and back. Their stories are abandoned because we are not quite at the right moment for them to make the most amount of money from your model sales. For me, though, artistic integrity of such an old and beloved setting should absolutely come first and then drive profit, not the other way around. I know, I'm preaching to the choir, and I know I'm living in an ideal world in my own head, but fuck that, I want my shit. Alright, I want 40k to stop edging us. I've spoken a lot about the irritating way fights are done in 40k. You know, two characters, they get together, oh, I will fight you, I will fight you. They clash for a little bit, they bash their heads together, and they declare it a draw and leave each other be. It's the most fucking irritating 40k thing ever. Nobody is ever allowed to lose. Because they're scared of what it'll do to their model sales. Unless you're fighting Space Wolves, of course, then fuck you. I guess this is what happens when selling models takes precedence over telling decent stories. But I have to reiterate that not everything needs to be moving forwards all the time. But plot points are introduced to 40k that are truly earth-shaking in almost every codex that are never seen again. And it happens with every codex release. These days, I read these events and I shrug, nonplussed, if I see them. Normally I'd be excited, but I'm not anymore. They've sapped all the excitement out of me. I'm not expecting any of these things to ever be fulfilled. So why bother with them? Alright? I'm nonplussed. I shrug when I read earth-shattering things in codex and lore, as I know they will never reach their conclusion. It's like the boy who cried wolf, or, you know, having a girlfriend who edges you constantly without ever letting you finish. Eventually, you just tell her to piss off, right? Well, I'm at that point with Games Workshop and their constant self-owns when it comes to introducing awesome things to 40k, only to seemingly forget about them the moment the codex is released and they've gotten their money. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 9,027 times more, shame on me. What do you think about immense stories in 40k and them never seeming to move forward or be finished? What do you think? Am I going mad? What are some examples that you have of massive plot points in 40k that were brought in, right, shown to you, and then jettisoned out the nearest fucking airlock, never to be seen again, because we've got your money now? Fuck you. Name them in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think is the worst, most egregious one. Also, I'll be doing a new series pretty soon, starting next week, that this video is kind of a primer for. Have you ever felt let down by 40k introducing things like Clone Fulgrim, the Terminus Decree, and other setting-shattering events, and then never actually delivering on them? Well, my friend, the Exile verse of 40k will tackle those problems one by one. We will even have a deep dive into returning Primarchs and whether any of them should return at all anymore, right? We'll be doing that next week. We'll call it Exile verse, and it will be either on Tuesday or a Thursday of the following weeks. As we go in, we will be starting with more Xenos factions and Imperial Guard factions that have been written by you guys over the next few weeks as well. But we're going to start with Exileverse very, very soon, because I did do them back in the day on you know, Primarch videos and lore videos for different factions, and how I would write them in the Exileverse. Maybe it's time I put my money where my mouth is and I write an Exileverse of what I would do with 40k from this moment onwards, right? So, I will do a poll very soon on where the Exileverse starts. Please, I'm gonna put the Horus Heresy as an option. Please don't do that to me. Please don't make me write every single fucking Primarch right back then, because I'll end up probably never sleeping. So it'll be things like, you know, should we start in the Great Crusade, or should we start in the modern 40k era? Should we start at the inception of the Primaris Marines, or so on and so forth? And you will get to decide where the Exileverse starts and where it diverges from modern day 40k. Right? Cool. We'll get into that pretty soon. I love you all a long time, and I'll speak to you tomorrow for some more Hobby Nightmares. Actually, tomorrow's Wednesday, isn't it? Right. So I might not be on tomorrow. I've still got my daughter. Things are going well there. I'm going to be hanging out with her all day tomorrow. But if I get some time, I will do Hobby Nightmares tomorrow. If I don't, I will see you on Thursday, alright? Love you a long time. Speak to you soon. Bye now.